Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Ed Hidalgo, I am so excited about having you on today's episode. I've been looking forward to this discussion for some time.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Ed, one of my signature questions that my listeners always enjoy hearing about is if you go back and think about what you wanted to be when you grew up someday, what was it that you wanted to be?
It's a great question, but frankly, I don't remember ever having a vivid or specific wannabe in the future. And probably it's because I wasn't such a great student. And I think that had something to do with the work that I got into today.
That kind of ill-defined, if you will, desire or goal for yourself when you grew up, what were the transition moments that you went through from being a child to where you're at today?
It's been quite a journey of transitions, and as a dyslexic thinker myself, understanding that the way I did school didn't necessarily indicate my potential success in the world of work. And that was the first hurdle that I had to get over. Once that was able to occur and I started to learn about my unique strengths, interests, and values, I began to be able to see how I could add value to the world. So difficult transitions through college, but then later understanding and developing relationships with professionals, beginning to see my place in the world in my first careers, and really finding myself in this world of human resources and talent acquisition at a pretty early age, I would say, upper 20s, really set the course for the work that I'm able to do today, working with young people and adults around finding their place in the world, so to speak.
Ed, we're going to take today's episode down a path that we haven't spent as much time on. And I think that it is really important, especially in today's marketplace. And we're going to talk just a bit in terms of contingent or temp work, or some may call it fitting into the gig economy. Before we ask those specific questions about that whole area, give us your read in terms of the marketplace today. Is it up? Is it down? Is it shifting? How do you see that job market today?
It feels like the job market's a little bit of all over the place, quite frankly. And as the world continues to advance and globalization and technology, artificial intelligence, obviously, playing such a big role in how work gets done, this world of just-in-time talent, the right skilled talent, and everything in between is a real topic for recruiters and for businesses, and of course for the workers who are trying to find their place in the world. I think more than ever, the importance of me, Inc. and managing my career is more important than ever because of these global changes. And I think it's something that your listeners really need to pay attention to as they think about their plans for the present as well as for the future.
The particular unique challenge, most colleges, universities don't train you to be thinking about me, Inc., and you have to kind of learn it on your own. That's a challenge.
You're 100% correct. And really, this is something that's been going on for as long as I can remember, certainly for as long as I've been in the world of work or the world of education. This idea of understanding self in the world and how we navigate and manage who we are and who we want to become isn't something that education spends a lot of time on. It's still very much a batch process. It's still very much a standards-based process. And for that reason, although education talks a lot about the individual and agency, it really isn't, in the most cases, an agentic process. And that's something that really does need to shift in order for our country really to benefit from the great talent that we have residing right within our amazing, states of America. So,
Ed, you spent almost 20 years working in and around the contingent labor market. That notion of temp workers, contingent workers is not new. It's been around for some period of time. What did you see as the value of that contingent workforce for the people that you helped place?
100%. I think at the top of the list of the greatest benefit is helping great talent get into a company through the back door. So in so many cases, we would see talent that for whatever reason couldn't make it through the front door process. For some reason, they were maybe screened out, not good enough, didn't check all the boxes. And because we handled so much volume of contingent labor talent, we were often able to convince or at least persuade a client to look at the talent through the contingent lens. Let's give them a shot. Let's give them a try. We think that they've got the chops to be able to do a very good job in this role. Look, there's no risk if you try them before you buy them. And in many cases, not only did the customer say, okay, but in many cases, these same contingent workers ended up converting to perm status at some point along the journey, which means that the front end process was just delaying the opportunity to get the right talent in the seat and was screening out talent that was perfectly aligned to the role for whatever reason. So I think there's probably nothing that gives me greater satisfaction in that battle for the worker to help them get a chance to show what they can do. So at the top of the list, having those conversions happen and happen at scale because of our good work was really meaningful in that role.
And our listeners may be somewhat apprehensive about contracting or temp jobs. What do you see in terms of how contractors were engaged and valued in that corporate environment?
It's the right question to ask. And I think this is something where bigger corporations often do a better job because naturally there's greater risk to those corporations if they don't do a good job with how they engage their workers. So, if things go sideways and there's a problem, whether it be a workers' compensation, if there's an injury or whatever the case might be that you can imagine from a FLSA standpoint, you want to do what's right by the worker. And the big companies, they want to treat their contract labor very well because they're now at this point starting to realize that this is an important source of talent. So I think when it comes to big companies, you're going to see an opportunity to really feel like part of the team. Sometimes with smaller companies, and it just depends, you may not feel the same way. There may not be as much of a welcome aboard kind of sentiment necessarily for contractors. But again, it all gets back to the company and the corporate values. And that's why you need to do your homework before you say yes to a role within any company, whether it's a small one or a large one. But I will say that the times have definitely changed when it comes to contractors not being valued. So I think you can think of it very differently in this modern era.
Ed, what were the challenges that you encountered when you were advocating for the value of that contingent worker in that corporate environment? And how did you address those speed bumps that were put in your way?
Well, I think a lot of times folks think that the perm recruiting staff is doing a better job or they have the greatest access to all the best talent. And, you realize a lot of times that some of the best talent is hidden within your ATS system. And with our programs, we were able to harvest some of that talent from within the ATS that maybe had been canceled out for whatever reason or been looked over. And we were maybe that second set of eyes to look at the talent. And over time, when you build a reputation, when you have a really strong contingent workforce program, I don't know if you're running an RPO or if you're internally managed, internally sourced, contingent. Once you begin to build your brand and you bring great talent to the table, which we did, then the hiring managers start to see you not as the other option, but as one of the options, one of the top options. We should look at contingent, maybe just like we look at university hires or intern conversions, the perm hire right through the front door, and contingent should also be at the top of the list. So I think it all depends on how you manage your program, but overcoming those objections or that pushback can happen by ensuring that you're bringing quality talent to the table every single time. And it can be sometimes in those places that you don't expect, like within your ATS, already in your database, just been overlooked.
Ed, is the process of applying and going through the hiring process different somehow if you're a temp or contingent worker versus if you're the traditional full-time worker?
It can be, certainly. It really just depends on the agency, but you're going to complete an application and there's an applicant tracking system. All the agencies, staffing agencies are using them. In fact, many of them are incorporating artificial intelligence. So a lot of the things and the steps that you would take to apply to a perm job directly to a corporation would also apply as you're thinking about applying to a staffing agency or a recruiting firm. So I think it's another good lesson that as you're getting back into the market, perhaps through a transition, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, the work that you put in to connect with a staffing partner, a recruiting organization, will help prepare you for any perm applications that you are deploying directly to an organization that you might be having on your list as a core prospect.
You've said the term staffing agency a number of times. Is that the portal that many contingent workers go through, or do they apply directly to the company?
I think in most cases, you're going to apply to a staffing agency. There's a lot of different ways it can happen. It depends on the level of sophistication of the company that you might be applying to. Sometimes you'll apply to a company directly and they say, you know what, we see your resume here. We don't think that you're a fit for this role. However, we do have some temp or contract opportunities that are available, and we have a staffing partner that helps us with that. We'd like to get your resume over to them if you're interested. So it really depends on the level of coordination that a company might have with their staffing partners. The bigger the company, oftentimes the better partnering that happens. If it's a small company, they may not be using a staffing partner, or they may only be using a staffing partner. So in some cases, you might apply to a small firm directly to that company's website, and it could go directly to their staffing partner, who essentially is an extension of that company's HR department, but it's outsourced. You wouldn't even know in most cases. But just like companies are outsourcing different aspects of their corporate responsibilities, whether, it might be the law side or the marketing side, they might be outsourcing the staffing side as well. So it's something to be aware of. As someone who's applying, you may not know the difference, but at the same time, at some point, you might know the difference if they let you know. We're actually a third party. We work with the client, and we're happy to take your resume and evaluate you for the role. You should experience nothing different along this process. We're happy to support you, and we're excited about your application. So I think for your listeners, it's something to be aware of, but not to be concerned of necessarily.
And how can I find staffing agency that I can even pursue? Do I Google staffing agencies that are local, or what should I do?
Yeah, it's the right question to ask. And I think if you've lived in a perm environment, like you've always been a perm employee, you've applied directly to companies and that's all you've ever known, there's probably in your community, especially in a large city, there might be 100 or more staffing companies. Quite frankly, there's a lot of them out there. So if you Google staffing agencies in my area, recruiting firms in my area, you have your global staffing companies, you might have regional staffing companies, you might have just a local staffing agency, maybe it's more of a mom and pop, and then you might have boutique firms right within your area. And for example, they might only work with people and companies that are sourcing for technology or biotech only. So there's some that are very specialized. So it's important to understand the type of work that you're interested in. You might want to go with a global agency that handles lots of different types of positions and careers and works with lots of different companies. But you might also want to focus on finding a specialist in your area if you have a niche, for example. But yes, they can all be Googled and found within your area.
Is this something that a college senior could utilize, do you think?
Most definitely. Well, I would say even a high school senior could. So, depending on the work permit age requirements in your area, that especially during the summertime, this is the type of thing that a high school student could most certainly develop a couple of relationships, maybe with some of the larger staffing firms in the area. And in fact, if you go to a sporting event or a music event, a concert, you'll see a lot of the security personnel aren't part of that building or that concert venue or that sports venue. They actually typically will work for a third party, a staffing agency that handles security only. So that's something that oftentimes during the summers, they're seeing a ramp up in demand, depending on what your summertime looks like in your area. If there's lots of events that crop up, it's a place that you might want to apply and see, well, are you looking for any temp workers over the summer? It's a great place to get started. But in the same way, for a college senior who's trying to make that transition into the world of work, it's a great way to potentially test the market and try some jobs on for size to see the work environments that you prefer or don't prefer. It's a great way to get a view into different companies as you're thinking about where might be the best fit for me.
And how do you think the perception of the contingent worker has evolved over the years? And get your crystal ball out. What do you think the future trajectory of them will be?
It's the right question to ask. And I think overall, there's been an improved perception, I think. Now, for a high school or a college senior that's graduating, maybe their parents don't see it that way because they only dream of their child having like this perfect offer from the perfect company, with the perfect salary. But, there really is this beauty in being able to evaluate, especially if you've never had an internship or if you haven't had access to an internship or a job shadow or you haven't had a lot of career exposure. It's a great way to get to explore companies like I'd mentioned earlier. But I think generally speaking, because of the gig economy, the idea of people being independent, to maybe having a side hustle, if it's not one that you're starting from an entrepreneurial perspective, but you want like a side hustle through gig work, there's a lot to offer in putting your lots of different hats on and trying out different things. So I think the brand is evolving. I think in the future, we're going to see more gig work, maybe micro-tasking, part-time work, and certainly with online staffing platforms like Upwork or Fiverr, which may be new to some of your listeners. Like we see that people from around the globe are stepping in to do independent work, contract work, have alternative work arrangements that suit their lifestyles. So I think everyone should know that this is available to them, and everyone should step in and do some research to understand how this could fit them at this time in their career journey, whether it's beginning, middle, or towards latter stages.
And Ed, are there certain skills or qualities that you believe are more essential for the success as a contingent worker? And do you have any suggestions in terms of how that potential contingent worker can develop those skills?
Well, I think because every type of employee or every type of skill or every type of labor is found working within contingent environments. So there isn't one type of skill that I would say is the one that you need to develop per se. I think the right thing to do is make sure that you're qualified for the job and that you're applying for a job that is aligned to the things that you can do and that you have some evidence in doing those things. Unless it's just bring the skills that you have kind of role. It's open-ended and non-specific. We're just looking for someone to come in and do X, Y, and Z, and we think that an average citizen could possibly do that work. There's some like that. But I think for the most part, people who are recruiting for contingent work, they're doing that for a customer. The customer has an expectation that a certain type of talent is going to be submitted that can do the job that's required from the spec, the job requisition or the posting. So you want to make sure that you're super aligned to that job posting in terms of skills, experience, background, etc., because the recruiter is not going to spend time with you if you're a wild card, so to speak. Now, sometimes they do, but in most cases, the recruiter's job is to find the right talent for the customer. They don't want to make any mistakes. So you want to make sure that you've gone through the process of really understanding what your skills are, what your skill set, and what you want to do before you apply. And when you do that, I think you have a better chance of getting a call back from a recruiter.
Ed, when we spent time getting to know one another, I discovered that if you look at your own personal career trajectory, that you really started some very interesting spin-off projects within your existing role at your large company that you are with. Can you tell us how and why did those roles come about? And did you initiate them on your own, or were they presented to you? How did that all come about?
I have been so fortunate in my career journey to have had leaders who were open to listening to the things that I was interested in doing. And I think that when you think of what can a boss do, or a manager or a leader do to help their employees want to stay, things like giving them autonomy, obviously very important, also allowing them to grow in the work that they want to do. And for some reason in my mind, I figured out very early on that if you do your job really well and that your employer wants you to stay engaged in your work, they're going to be interested in listening to the types of things that you might want to bring to the table, so to speak, that might be new and innovative that can benefit the department, whether it's improving the brand or highlighting the brand or adding new value to the work that's happening within your department. And so because of that, as I dreamt up my own career goals, as I had these career dreams that were evolving, the things that I wanted to do in my own journey, I made sure that I would plant these seeds, so to speak, with my supervisors, my bosses, the VPs that I got to work with. And it was just interesting that over time that those ideas surfaced and that I was able to realize some of my career dreams, like starting the career counseling practice, like starting the maker space for middle school students, 2 environments where we saw more than 15,000 clients or employees, visitors to those spaces that really enriched my life, but equally enriched the work that was happening within those departments. So really, it was a win-win for both of us, a win for the company, a win for me as a worker and employee, but it wouldn't have happened without a receptive boss, but more importantly, without me planting the seed of the things that I was dreaming about, because my bosses would never have known had I not shared.
Ed, when we had that discussion to get to know one another, we talked about the importance of innovation, entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship. Those are words you don't oftentimes hear when someone is talking about finding a new great job for themselves. How does that impact your job search?
It might be cliche at this point because sometimes you hear these things kind of thrown about. You got to own your own career and Me Inc., as we mentioned earlier. But truly, the entrepreneurial aspect of finding your own job, I often say it's harder than the job that you might do once you find it is the thing that you want to do, because it's hard work. It can be grueling. It can be maddening. It can be saddening. It can be a complex and misunderstood process. There isn't a black and white process to it all. I mean, there just isn't this perfect schematic for how you find that next thing. But when you take it on as an entrepreneur would, and you do the types of things that any startup would do, I think that's a great recipe for helping anyone be able to find the next right role for them when they're in the state of transition. Think like an entrepreneur, think like a CEO, study their best habits, their best practices, how they're thinking about their new products. And in that method of you as the product is a way to really advance the journey that you'll be on when you're finding yourself in the place of transitions.
Ed, you made what some would call a fairly radical transition to work in education coming from that corporate staffing world. What was it about your career at that point that led you to make that change? And then how did you go about it?
So the clarity from me came because I really understood elements of who I am as a human and as a worker. I understood my strengths, my natural talents, my interests, what I like to do, and my workplace values, how they had been evolving. And career is a lifespan process. But these elements of self are resident in us across that journey. And these elements of self, especially our strengths and interests, remain relatively stable. Our values change over time. You asked me earlier about this idea of entrepreneurship and these ideas, these projects. Well, those projects were clues. They were ideas that were launched in a way for me to test some of these elements of self that I was thinking about for my future. The career counseling practice was something that I was interested in. Could this be a future career trajectory for me in a place of transition? Might I go towards the work of career counseling or coaching? The work with the maker space for middle schoolers to advance the idea of STEM within a STEM corporation where we saw 15,000 students, my social helping theme, my enterprising theme. Could this be a way for me to explore more about my future career transitions? And guess what? Both of those experiences, both of those projects within a company led me to the work that I'm doing now. But it wouldn't have happened, I think, without this understanding of my strengths, my interests, and my changing workplace values. And really listening to those elements of self, of me, who I am, who I want to become, helped me make that radical choice to leave corporate and begin to explore the world of education and how I could bring my learnings from the corporate world to benefit public education in our communities.
And Ed, that ties into how knowing about career theories could help one of the listeners as they're thinking about their own future career and steps that they would be taking. Is that the tie in there?
I believe so, yes, most definitely. And there are some beautiful career theories that have been researched for decades and oftentimes don't necessarily make it in front of an employee until, they're sitting down with a career counselor. But I think that there's aspects of career theory and career education that should be brought forward. Of course, it's the work that I do, so I'm completely biased, but I believe these elements should begin in the earliest grades and primary grades so that we can better equip people to think strategically and to think through the lens of these great psychologists so that every person can find their place in the world if they so choose.
And I always like to hear memorable success stories. Any of them that you have from the time that you worked with the contingent labor force that you think illustrates well the positive impacts on individuals' recruiting efforts and careers in that contingent space?
Well, I remember one gentleman came in, I think it was a Friday at probably 5:30. This is when I was still with the recruiting firm and I was in the office. We probably were going to close 6:30 that evening on a Friday. This gentleman came in through the front door and was kind of in some manufacturing type clothing, was a little bit dirty and wasn't really coming in with like a coat and tie kind of thing, coming to interview. And I was up at the front and he said, I'm here, I'd like to apply for a job. And I'm like, what are you interested in? And we got to talking and he struck me as a very special individual. And I said, look, I don't think that you're ready right at this moment to really step into an interview. Here's some things that I'd like for you to do. And this was an older gentleman, probably mature in his career, but serious. I could see the look in his eyes. I said, I want you to take these things home and I want you to practice and come back on Monday, but I want you to dress for success. I want you to come ready for an interview. I want you to be ready to answer some of these questions. I think you have them within you. You're not revealing it right now. So I want you to come back. He said, okay, I'm going to take this home and I'll see you on Monday. Over the weekend, I called the house and I just said, hey, I'm just checking in. You're coming on Monday, right? And he said, I'm going to be ready on Monday. So that gentleman came in and he was ready. And I'll tell you, we hired him at one of our main customers for a custodial role. And because this client wants to make sure anyone who works on site for us, it doesn't matter who you are, everyone needs to be able to interface with the customer. And we need to make sure that they can advance our brand no matter who you are. Well, the gentleman ended up getting the job. 2 years later, became a supervisor at that company over all of the custodians. And hearing from his manager, the impact that that person had made, I don't want to use his name, but the impact that this person had made within the entire department, within that entire corporate community, had changed the culture and environment in such a positive way that one person. And to me, it's just a story of there's something within everyone. Someone just needs to see it. Someone just needs to ask the question. If I had just given up on him because he didn't come through the door ready, then that would have been a failure on me, not on him, because he didn't know what was required. But he took that coaching, came back on Monday, came ready, dressed for success, ready to answer the questions, and then went off and became his best self. He said, this is the best job I've ever had. So I think if we as adults in HR and recruiting, if we would look a little bit further than just the resume, if we look further than the person who steps in the moment, if we look a little bit deeper into the human that's on the other side, what might we find? And in this case, we found a diamond in the rough. And I was just so happy for him, happy for the client, and happy for myself. Made me feel good too, because I found the right person for the job.
Ed, any books or other resources that you would recommend to our listeners that may be going through their own career transition, either to a contingent or the traditional full-time role?
Well, I will tell you that it's so interesting because I had somebody text me over the weekend and said, a couple of years ago, you gave me this article, and I just want you to know that it's playing a role in my life right now. And I was wondering if we could have an informational interview to talk more about the article and some things I'm thinking about for my future career. And it's an article from 1999 that's found in the Harvard Business Review. And you may have heard of it, but it's the Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. And what's just so powerful about his words is how relevant the things that he talked about back then are to this day. And the need to really cultivate a deep understanding of yourself, not only what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also how you learn, how you work with others, what your values are, and where you can make the greatest contribution. Because only when you operate from your strengths can you achieve true excellence. But this is such a foundational piece, in my opinion, that Mr. Drucker put together. As we learn to manage ourselves and really understand ourselves and who we are, then we can be more effective to communicating that to the places and the people where we want to work. So I would recommend just starting with a reflection after reading this very brief article found in the Harvard Business Review by Mr. Drucker. It is a true gem.
Ed, we have gone through so much material today. Thank you for all that you've shared. If our listeners only take away 3 items to help them in their job search, what are those 3 items that you want them to remember?
Well, I really like this from a post I was reading today from Maureen McCann. She helps people strategize on their transitions. And I like what she had to say because I agree with many of these elements. Number 1, keep a pulse on who's doing cool stuff. Whether it's projects or organizations in your community, find those organizations that are doing things that are interesting to you, that you care about, that you'd want to be a part of. Get yourself energized by knowing who they are in your community. Take stock of what's happening there or around the world, for that matter. With technology, we can access great corporations from all over. So take note of who's doing cool things. Number 2, it's hard when you're open to everything. And sometimes people would come into the recruiting office and I'd say, what are you looking to do? And they'd say, I'm open to anything. It's really hard because there are no jobs with that title. So I think it's important, although we want you to dream, at the same time, we want you to keep your list of ideas to jobs a little bit more narrow. You have to narrow things down to make it easier for recruiters to understand, where can I find the best place for you? So you might start with everything, but at some point you're going to have to narrow things down. I think that's a really important thing to do. And thirdly, I think if you're in a place of transition, making a point of really making a list of what are the things that you like to do and what don't you like to do. Now you can take stock, you can take inventory over processing what are the things over my career that I've done really well, that I've enjoyed doing. Remember, just because you can do something really well doesn't mean that you like doing it. So let's process this idea of like doing it and do it well. And that also let's look at what don't I want to do? What don't I like doing? Because now is the chance for you to be able to reflect and share and position yourself to doing something that really aligns more deeply to the things that you want to do. And again, maybe that's calling and purpose. And that would go with that, what you like to do versus what you don't like to do. So I think those 3 ideas are ones that are important to think about.
Ed, there's no question in my mind that you are completely aligned with what you like to do and what you're good at doing. And we're the recipient of that great alignment. So I want to thank you for all of your thoughts today and the support that you provided to our listeners. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true gift.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.